Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with the main stories in the global economy. Coming up today, as the world increasingly calls for social justice, co-ops are on the rise. First, a look at the headlines. Bitcoin suffered the biggest setback in its 5-year history after a major exchange shut down on Tuesday. The abrupt closure of Tokyo-based Mt. Gox underscored the risks of the virtual currency that has seen a meteoric rise in the past year. Unlike a bank failure, when deposits are insured by the government, there is no way out for traders of the virtual currency. Mt. Gox, the paramount marketplace for buyers and sellers of Bitcoin, stopped transactions following months of technical issues and cyber attacks. An unconfirmed report online claims Mt. Gox had lost 750,000 Bitcoins in a long-running theft, representing 6% of Bitcoins in existence, or $400 million. The Chinese currency's drop over the past week could trigger an unwinding of billions of dollars in highly leveraged bets on its appreciation. Businesses and wealthy clients of private banks are among the biggest buyers of financial products that profit from appreciation in the yuan. The products they bought magnify profits from gains in the currency, but could lead to big losses if the yuan falls. On Tuesday, the dollar rose to 6.1115 against the so-called offshore yuan from 6.0984 yuan the day before. The EU felt confident enough to upgrade its economic forecasts, saying a modest recovery is sustainable if member states stick to reforms. The European Commission said the 18-nation Eurozone will grow 1.2% this year and 1.8% in 2015. The full 28-member EU will expand 1.5% and 2.0%, also both revised up by 0.1 percentage point. Growth is expected to pick up in all EU members, including Greece, Italy, and Spain. But the average annual Eurozone public deficit, the shortfall between government revenues and spending, is forecast to remain below the EU 3% limit. And total accumulated debt is also expected to show little improvement, staying well over the EU's 60% limit.
It is good news that economic activity has also started to strengthen in the vulnerable countries. The differences in growth rates between countries are projected to narrow in this period of 2014 and 2015.
Several European nations suspended assistance to Uganda a day after the country's president signed a law that could see some homosexuals jailed for life. Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark said they would withhold aid to the Ugandan government in protest against the draconian law. The measure will immediately affect at least $8 million in aid to Uganda's legal system. The Netherlands and Denmark said they would redirect nearly $20 million of aid to Ugandan-based private aid agencies and rights groups. Although the bill is politically popular in Uganda, it could cost the government as much as $2 billion in aid if its main donors, the US and Canada, follow suit. And shares of electric car maker Tesla surged 14%, rising further into record territory. The stock gained more than 30% since Tesla reported stronger than expected profit and raised its sales targets. Tesla shares rose to a high above $250 on Tuesday after starting on the stock market in 2010 at less than $20 a share. Tesla is expected to announce plans to open a massive new lithium battery factory that will have capacity equal to all factories making such batteries around the globe. The factory is crucial to Tesla's plan to make an affordable electric car in large enough numbers to compete on the global market. Social justice has been the name of the game as people all over the world crowd into the streets demanding better living conditions. One of the outcomes of Israel's social justice movement has been the slow growth of cooperatives across the economy. Let's take a look in the next report by Daniel Roth.
In the summer of 2011, Israeli city streets were filled with tents and a feeling of collective power. Hundreds of thousands demonstrated against the ongoing privatization of the Israeli economy and the rising cost of living that was leaving so many behind. With more than 1 in 5 Israelis living under the poverty line, people were looking for economic solutions, and many found answers in the cooperative business models that empower consumers and owners, often one and the same, alike. Cooperatives have been blossoming over the past 3 years since the protests largely died down.
OFIC is a direct result of the protest movement, the social protest movement of 2011. The Zaken Commission has examined the banking market and came up with a conclusion that 95% of the banking market is controlled by 5 banks. And actually, in fact, 2 big banks control the banking market. The banks have successfully locked up the market in an almost cartel-like situation. OFIC will be just like a regular bank. You as an account holder will get the same services at a better service and at a better rate than you would get from a commercial bank, because we won't have to divide up the profits of the bank amongst capital, amongst shareholders, but the profits will go back into operating the bank and capitalizing the bank itself.
It's a global phenomenon, but the ground in Israel is particularly ripe given its history of social democracy and strong welfare programs before the 1980s. Customers pay 3,000 shekel, just over $855, to buy into the cooperative bank and get low interest on loans, nominal fees, and transparency from the currently 120-person strong core group of organizers that work within a democratic decision-making model.
There are 3 groups of people in the mix. The social activists, young people coming out of the protest movement, they're ex-bankers. And we have average people like myself, the movement from a centrally controlled economy to a privately controlled economy. We just moved the center of control from one group to another group.
While the bank aims to fundamentally change the way banking is done in Israel, Bar Kayama, in the heart of Tel Aviv's hip Florentine area, acts as an alternative space to eat vegan, drink with friends, and develop community. The co-op was set up in the wake of the 2011 protests, in part as a space to continue the radical culture that had grown out of the tent movement.
Not a single person owns this place, but a group of 400 members. The goals are not just to make money for one person, but to make the community as prosperous as possible, not only financially, but spiritually, but culturally. We started with basically no experience at all. I mean, the people that founded this place were a bunch of, idealists and dreamers. We have to not only scream for social justice and social change, but we also have to prove that it's possible, that it's something that's sustainable.
Members pay 1,000 shekel, just over $285, to become part owners and enjoy the members' significantly better prices and voting rights on various decisions. Simultaneously, a brand new supermarket called Shelanu, which means ours, opened just weeks ago in another section of Tel Aviv. Anyone can shop there, and there are no members' prices. Instead, co-owners pay 1,000 shekel each to buy 1 share in the company. Shareholders can take part in making the large strategic decisions, while a smaller group deals with most of the management. With signs declaring the market's values of solidarity, transparency, and sustainability, this is not the average urban shopping experience. Co-ownership, democratic decision-making, and consuming the fruits of cooperative ventures seems to be enriching to those taking part and growing in prevalence.
And we're joined now by Ifat Solel, the chairperson of the Cooperative Alliance for Social, Environmental, and Economic Justice. Ifat, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi.
So you were very much involved, obviously, with the social justice movement that we saw here in Tel Aviv, all over Israel for that matter, about 2 years ago. We saw just now the cooperative movements that have been established since. Can you give me a bit of a background on yourself and what your part in this has been?
So what we've been doing since the summer of 2011 is, talk to people and suggest the solution of cooperatives. The best thing about cooperatives is that we don't need anyone in order to start one. We just need ourselves. We need a group of people that has a good idea, a good economic idea, and a good social idea, and they can just make it happen. So what we've been doing since the summer of 2011 is meeting different groups that want to take responsibility upon a specific aspect of their economic lives, and help them start cooperatives. And we have, as you see, an actual movement, a new movement of cooperatives that started in the last 2.5 years. We have consumers cooperatives, workers cooperatives, bars and restaurants, coffee shops all over, and we are working on starting a bank.
Okay, but we are still talking about a relatively small group of people, correct?
It depends on what you call small, because we have small groups of people that took charge upon their lives, but we are talking about different kinds of organizations. Some of them are pretty small, some of them would become pretty big. I mean, we are working on starting a bank now. It's going to be a huge thing. Of course, when we're talking about workers' cooperatives, it's supposed to be just a small organization.
Right.
And when we're talking about consumers' co-op, then it depends on what the specific group wants the cooperative to look like.
Okay, well, excuse my ignorance. I mean, when I first think of the cooperative, I think of a small group of people. And beyond that, it also seems to me like it's sort of more like a Band-Aid on a big bruise. I mean, the Israeli society continues to ache. The social justice movement hasn't really managed to necessarily change the way in which the Israeli government functions. What is your reaction to that?
Well, of course, we have the most neoliberal government in the world. They don't want to change anything. They don't think that their responsibility is towards their citizens. This is why, this is one of the reasons for starting cooperatives, because we don't need anyone else. But I think that the cooperative solution is not necessarily a small one. I mean, we're part of an international movement. We're part of an international movement that has more than 1 billion members, that employs more than 100 million people.
Which exists, obviously, because the Israeli government, I guess, is not the only one that's actually so neoliberal. I mean, it's really sort of a more widespread situation that we're seeing, isn't it?
It is, but in the Western world, we are having now the most neoliberal government.
Okay.
But the cooperative solution is there for many years now, started in 1844. So we have many organizations that are working all around the world. And it's not only because the governments don't function, because part of the being a part of a cooperative is taking responsibility. It's the fact that we're talking about democratic organizations.
Right.
So it's a huge celebration for democracy, which was really in a bad shape in Israel. So I think that what we've started, and it is a start yet, but it's a huge start, because we're talking about more than 30 organizations that started in 2.5 years. It's huge. It's unprecedented.
Can you give me an example of other kinds of cooperatives that you see outside of Israel, and what countries are we talking about?
We're talking about all over the world, one of 4.
But it's Western nations, you said.
What?
You're talking specifically about Western nations, right?
Yes, but it's all over the world.
Okay.
I mean, it's in the Western world, it's in the developing countries, all over. If we're talking about Western world, then one of every 4 American citizens is a member of a cooperative, one of every 3 Canadians, one of every 3
but that's necessarily
French people.
But that's not necessarily in response to social justice. That's just because those things have been around for many, many years.
Well, they have been
America.
around for many, many years because people want to create their own economic institutions. Because if we didn't have really strong consumer movement, cooperative consumer movement in Western Europe, then the prices of products would have been in Europe like they are in Israel. I mean, I think this is really it's a major reason for the outrageous prices we've got here. We don't have a big cooperative consumers movement.
Can you have examples of other co-ops in different countries that are successful?
Well, 20% of all of the banking system in Europe is cooperative. We're talking about huge things all over. We have, of course, the John Lewis in Britain. But really, it's a huge. We have more than 1 billion members all over the world. So we have all the credit unions in the U.S., the cooperative banks in Canada and in Europe, of course, and consumers organizations in Italy, in France, in
And you
England.
foresee Israel also having the potential to grow to that extent that you see in Europe and other countries?
I think so, and we must remember that Israel was built by cooperatives.
Okay.
Most of the urban cooperatives that used to be in Israel demutualized over the years because of many reasons, which we won't go into now.
Okay.
But we do have it in our system, and it's just a matter of people's decision to make it happen again.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Yifat Solel, for your comments.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And now for a look at the international media in Media Watch with Daniel Roth. So Daniel, I understand we have a story from The Guardian?
Yeah, so The Guardian's running this piece. They did some research. They found out that there's about 11 million empty homes across Europe, which is twice as many homes as there are homeless people. You could house all the homeless people in Europe 2 times
their
over.
friends.
And their friends, yeah.
Wow, okay.
If they each have one friend.
Right.
Okay. But it's really unbelievable, and what it's rooted in is 2 things. One of them is there was a housing bubble that leading up to 2007, 2008.
Right.
44% was the rise in home prices during that time, and a lot of these houses have never been lived in, all these empty houses.
Unbelievable, right.
The second piece is that in cities across the world,
The urban centers, presumably.
their prices are going up.
Right.
Gentrification is happening, and in a lot of cases, for example, right here in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, there's a lot of empty apartments for 10 months out of the
Because
year.
in our current economy, who can afford them?
Right. There's 2 kinds of empty apartments, and it's really causing a stir, because when you have twice as many empty apartments, you're
Thanks so much for that little tidbit about the housing situation. That takes us to the end of this edition. Thank you very much for watching, and do join us again tomorrow for more on the economy.